Hello, today's video is going to be a review of another vintage laptop. It's a Satellite Pro 480 or 480 CTT. It's quite a good laptop. It has Pentium MMX at 233 MHz. It's one of the fastest Pentium 1 models that was ever released. And it has quite a good configuration that I will present to you further as we go along. First of all, let me present the power adapter, because many times when we talk about these kind of laptops, we also have to find adapters that are compatible, and it's not always easy to find data sheets for them. So this is the typical adapter. This is an original model. It's a 15 volts 3 amp power supply, and the jack is like that. It's your typical barrel jack. So this is the power adapter. Alright, let me show you around the laptop and tell you more about the configuration as we go along. The laptop is quite quite nice in terms of its capabilities. It's a quite compact laptop. Over here on the left side you can see the power button. It can be locked and unlocked. I'm not entirely sure what was the purpose for this lock. Over here you have a special connector for the floppy disk drive. On the back side we have the power supply input, the PS2 port for keyboard and mouse, the fan, which is very important to note that in this particular model, due to power saving features available in later Pentium MMX models, is running very rarely, if ever. So this is an excellent laptop in this respect, an excellent configuration, and also the internal heatsink is quite large. The serial port, a highly important docking port, is over here, an infrared port and an essential USB port. Yes, you heard that right. It's a Pentium 1 MMX with a USB port. It's USB 1, don't have high hopes for fast transfers, but it's essential because it will be very easy to transfer files between your laptop and other computers you have at your disposal. The LPT port and your typical VGA port. And on the right side you can see the PCMCIA dual slots actually. The PCMCIA slot can actually house your standard selection of cards. There is no problem about it. And the removable drive bay. This drive can be easily removed and exchanged if you have available. So, okay. This CD-ROM drive can be exchanged with floppy drive. So it's quite a versatile system, and much more importantly, of course the port is proprietary, but you were expecting that. Much more important is the fact that the laptop itself is very compact. So having this sort of ability in such a compact device, I think, is a major advantage. Unfortunately, it's not very easy to place it, so if you don't mind. Alright, placed it again. The sound card. The sound card is highly interesting because you have an ASS 1868, which is a typical sound card that was used on most Toshiba laptops. of that era, and Yamaha OPL free audio card, which means that the MIDI playback capability is simply fantastic. And this is one of the major features of Japanese laptops, the fact that they have very good sound cards. I should also mention the screen, but first of all, let me end by saying that you have some status LEDs over here for laptop powering, for the battery, for the hard drive, for the removable drive, and your typical jack inputs and outputs for the sound card, and also a highly important analog knob for setting the volume on the audio output. Alright, when we open the laptop, we can clearly see the screen. Regarding the screen, I should also mention one other important aspect. There were more types of screens supplied with this laptop generation. Some of them were passive matrix, others were active matrix. The ones that you are mostly interested in if you collect this kind of laptops is obviously the active matrix one, because they look so nice when working. This is a 12.1 inch TFT screen. It's the top of the line model. Actually, you can think about another aspect. The CDT moniker, or actually the T at the end of the moniker of the laptop, the model number, is signaling a device that has an active matrix TFT screen. The passive matrix one, the cheaper ones, were having a CDS naming, had the S at the end, and the model number differed based upon the processor configuration. And I think that the D is due to the fact that the laptop has an integrated has a removable bay that is being sold with the CD-ROM drive. Other than that, in terms of the keyboard, you have your typical Toshiba keyboard. The acupoint, which is similar to the track point in the way in which it operates. It's a small knob that moves the pointer on the screen, and I think it's quite good to use. The keyboard itself did not have major changes between this laptop model and previous ones. It's the same keyboard. It doesn't have a Windows keyboard. I don't think that is an issue. And on the lower side, I should have mentioned the fact that it has an easily accessible, removable caddy for the main disk drive. You just have to remove a screw over here and then pull the caddy, and you have easy access to the disk drive. And of course, the laptop, hopefully, and this is another very good aspect, it is compatible even with later IDE drives, later era IDE drives. So it should have very small issues of compatibility if you have to replace the internal disk drive. This is important because typical disk drives of the era clearly have issues related to their durability, and there is very little you can do. Unfortunately, it's a fact of life with such old laptops and technology. Most Toshiba drives that were supplied back then had issues with reliability, and there is a tendency of their actuator, if I remember rightly, sticking, and this makes the disk drive attempt to start but without success. Anyway, you can disassemble the drive. It's not very easy. You can unstick the actuator, but ultimately it still results in a disk drive that will probably have issues down the line due to wear and tear. There is not much that you can do about it, but I have to mention this fact because many persons suddenly find out that the computers they bought that were perfectly operating when they bought them, or computers that were presented as working, have this sudden change in operation, and there is very little you can do about that. So you should be aware of the situation. All right. Something else I would also like to present to you. I mentioned the screen. Well, the screen is an 800 by 600 pixel resolution. It's not a high resolution screen, but due to its size, I think it's just right. Think about that. Back when such models were released, few had good display scaling, which meant that it's better to see your typical MS-DOS 640 by 480 screen with a slight border than seeing it stretched, especially with such old laptop technology. So this is not an issue, and it's actually an advantage. All right, let's power on the laptop, and I will show to you some benchmarks along the way. Alright, as you can clearly see, one of the first occurrences is going to be due to the fact that the battery is not having a proper voltage and the settings are not being kept. You shouldn't be too much concerned about this, because ultimately it's even better this way, because batteries can leak inside. And the BIOS battery and another battery for suspension purposes, I mean when the system enters the suspend mode, is going to keep some information valid in the RAM. Both of these have nickel cadmium, if I remember rightly, and they can leave quite a mess when they are going to be worn out. Alright, so let me see if I can show you the screen better. Okay, I think this is as good as it's going to get. Alright, so first let's press the F1 key. One major important mention about the laptop. The laptop configuration is not having too much capabilities in terms of selecting the display brightness. And this is a common occurrence and a common grievance I have with Toshiba laptops, the fact that you cannot set the display brightness level. You can make some sort of change if you enter a power saving mode, or if you select a power saving mode that has only the display brightness being changed. If you will look closely, you will notice over here some settings. You can make a custom setting, and in that case you can have a lower brightness level with higher processing speed, or the opposite, having low brightness level with a higher processing speed. So low brightness, high processing speed, high brightness, low processing speed. You can make all sorts of combination with this. Unfortunately, as mentioned, there is no way to have various brightness levels. And this is sometimes unpleasant for persons that are not working in particularly bright light conditions. What else I also have to mention? This is one of the laptops I refurbished, and I have changed successfully the coil cathode fluorescent lamp that is used as a backlight for the screen. And this is one of the screens that is quite easy to repair. So if you have a screen that is not having the necessary brightness, it's yellowed, or has any other sort of problems, it's quite easy to repair. And of course, taking into consideration the fact that you have a lamp available, or you can find a spare one, although they get more and more difficult to find these days. All right, so let's end the configuration. Actually, I haven't set up anything. The amount of RAM is plenty for a laptop of its time. Think about the fact that 32 megabytes was enough for such a laptop that had a Pentium 1 era processor. However, I think that this is plenty. I mean, more than 64 megabytes of RAM are actually enough for running Windows 98, so I don't think that is going to be a problem. Alright, I will show to you some benchmarks, run some games, and tell you my final perspective on the laptop. Alright, first of all, let's see if I can show you better the screen. Yes, I don't think this is a good approach because it's kind of dark. I think this one. Yes. In general, with older laptops that are not overly bright, you have to constantly adjust focus and brightness or actually the exposure of the camera in order to be able to have a better looking screen. Unfortunately, it's a fact of life. I don't think that there is an easy way to have a very good balance. And unfortunately, even if you would have liked to see the screen brighter or to see the laptop brighter, I think you have to accept this compromise. All right. The screen colors are very good. Actually, with just about any LCD screen, you have to think first at the condition of the fluorescent lamp that is being used. If it's worn out, then the colors are going to be washed. But as far as I remember, with quite a new screen from another laptop, the colors were good. Alright, let's go to the benchmarks. I will show you some of these benchmarks because most of them are not going to be that helpful. The 233 megahertz processor is plenty fast in order to run Doom and most of the early Pentium 1 era games and benchmarks. That's not a problem. I think that the only small disadvantage of this laptop is that it uses Chips and Tech graphics chipset. Chips and Tech's 65,555 or 65,555 chipset. It's not a bad chipset, it's a very good one in terms of compatibility. Unfortunately, it's not quite well suited for this particular configuration, in the sense that it's a bit lacking compared with what the CPU can do. And I think this is my only gripe I have with this configuration. I also wanted to show to you this benchmark because it's going to be quite telling. It's one of the very good benchmarks that could be run on such vintage computers, because it's going to show not only the speed at which the processor operates, but it's also going to show additional details pertaining to the memory speed and particularly the video chipset capability in terms of performance. And as you can see over here, the video chipset is not particularly having a high performance. You cannot do much about that, but it's a fact of life. The memory access is quite low for the video chipset, which means that some of the games that could be used at higher resolution are not going to work very fine with such chipset. You're not going to find many games that are going to have issues, but keep in mind that it's not going to operate as fast as Pentium 1 system could be, despite the 233 megahertz processor speed, which is actually very good. Alright, I think that you have seen enough of the laptop running this configuration. The hard drive has been changed with another model. I think it's a much more recent Pentium 2 or Pentium 3 era IDE drive, because the original one has died and we could not do much about it. Regarding the memory, I have to make another important mention. The fact that the memory used in this laptop is based on the DIMM standard, as far as I can tell, but it's based on the Edo standard, but you cannot use the standard Edo modules that you would use on other laptops. I think it has some sort of proprietary chipset function that makes your replacement SODIMM modules not operate right in this condition. So you cannot do too much about that, but I wanted to mention this is an issue. The performance of the processor is actually very good. You can see on the level 1 cache, level 2 cache, and the memory access that it's quite balanced. Unfortunately, as I said, the major issue is the video chipset. You're not going to find many games where this is not going to be enough, but keep in mind that if you might have expected to run Quake 2 in 800 by 600 resolution, is not going to be particularly fast. Alright, let me show you a typical Doom benchmark, because I think this is going to be very telling. Doom is not a particularly demanding game. It can run pretty well even on 486 processors of the era. So if you have a DiX2 at 66, you're already running quite reasonable. But I think that a Pentium around 100 MHz, 133 is enough to run well such a game at a proper performance. I mean, to have quite a high frames per second. On the other side, with Quake, yes, you have to have a Pentium 1 era processor. Running it on a 486, although possible, is not going to be particularly fast. And in general, you have to accept the fact that there are so many issues with running it. I'm going to show also this benchmark, not particularly for the information it provides, but due to the fact that it shows quite well the screen response time. As far as I can tell, this is a good screen response time. I have seen TFT screens in older generation laptops having worse performance. And even in some laptops of the era that were not necessarily made by major brands such as IBM and Toshiba, there were certain issues with the response time. But this laptop handles it very well. Alright, I think that another telling benchmark that is good to show is going to be the standard one I am typically using. I don't remember rightly if it has any sort of problem. Sometimes this test can freeze when running the initial part, so this is why I'm not entirely sure. As you can see, you have a very consistent performance. This is one of the aspects that I like the most about Toshiba and IBM laptops of the era, the fact that they were highly consistent in performance. And if you are going to run in the low power mode, because I mentioned the low power mode, but I have not been offering details about it. The low power mode basically runs the CPU at half speed. So if you have some CPU sensitive games, you're going to run them very good. And if I remember correctly, I just have to press it. Sorry. Yes. And right now it runs at around 120 megahertz processor. It's 115 because it has to be around half of the 233 megahertz rating. So if you have games that are more speed sensitive, you can run them very well in this way. And as you have noticed, the brightness already changes along. You can change the basic way in which these settings are being created in the BIOS that I have shown you previously. Alright, and let's also show the floating point unit performance. It's very good, along the line of typical late Pentium MMX processors. And again, if we are going to run it at half speed, you're going to see that it falls in line with the estimated performance. So you have a highly versatile system, and the ability to run at low power is consistent in just about any situation. And this is one of the major features of Toshiba laptops. The fact that even if you are in Windows, whether you are running Windows, DOS, Windows 95, Windows 98, it doesn't matter. The same functionality can be triggered through key press, and I think this is wonderful for various testing purposes. So this means that it can simulate a lower spec computer quite easily, and this is something that is highly important. I'm just showing you some of these details. Perhaps I should have been going to the video adapter. Alright, as you can see, the typical configuration, as far as I remember, yes, it has 2 megabytes of video RAM, which is plenty. I have no complaint about that. Don't expect any 3D capability, because these laptops did not have such capability. The famous Sound Blaster, the ASS Sound Blaster chipset, which is highly compatible with DOS games. You can run just about any DOS game with the Sound Blaster Pro emulation very well. And all too important, I don't know if I can, no, it doesn't present additional details. I wanted to see if there is also any sort of mention about the Yamaha OPL3 chipset, but no, we don't have this capability exposed. Alright, now let me see. Okay, I will show you running Windows 3.11, actually Windows for Workgroups. It's a very fitting combination for this laptop. As you can see, it also has a typical cursor. Alright, over here it's slightly overexposed. Let me see if I can find a good compromise. I think this one is quite reasonable. Alright, so regarding the way in which the screen looks, it's simply perfect, but this is mostly due to the good condition of the screen and having no dead pixel, along with having a brand new CFL lamp, cold cathode fluorescent lamp. Alright, I will show you the typical benchmark I'm running with such vintage games. Oh, sorry, I think that it crashed. This can happen in Windows. You don't have to necessarily be surprised. Windows, this version of Windows was not particularly fond of running in stably without any sort of issues. Alright, let's see what kind of benchmark I will show. I think that the best one is going to be for the CAD, or the drawing simulation. And over here you can see a clearly excellent performance from the processor. Keep in mind that some processors of the previous era were not able to run at such high speed. Actually, there is also another important aspect. The video chipset also plays a part in such a high performance system, and I think that the Chips and Tech implementation has various CAD drawing features that make it have a very fast drawing capability. And this is especially important because this chipset, or previous generation chipset, have shown quite a good performance even on 486 processors. So it's clear that Chips and Tech technology had some optimizations for these CAD applications. And I'm going to show you clearly that this is the case, and there is no denying in this sense, because the moment you're running other applications, you're going to see a performance that is somewhat in line with expectations. In general, performance on the spreadsheet test is going to be quite similar to the one on the CAD test. If the chipset is not particularly optimized and the processor is having roughly the same ability of displaying graphics in combination with the video chipset. On the other side, other tests, as mentioned, are not having such a high performance, and I think that the Paint one, yes, the word processing one is going to have the lowest performance. I remember because this is the test that I'm always running quite late in the benchmarking suite. Yes, so 102 point. It's actually the smallest, or roughly the smallest performance you can have. There is some sort of variability that occurs with tests, so you don't have to be overly picky about results. They could be around 2 or 3 points higher or lower based upon the moment you're running the test. However, I think that the results are very good, and they go on to show that the performance is highly appropriate for most applications of DRI. If you have something in mind running for that was released around 1995 or 1996 and did not require advanced graphics capabilities, I think it's going to be working quite fine. And I want to show to you, unfortunately, I got again into the same problem. I'm not entirely sure what is the issue over here, but certainly there is something that is not working. I'm going to try and attempt running the program that I think should be working perfectly. I wanted to show to you exactly what was the performance of the video card and how you can make sure that the video chipset actually is the part that doesn't have too much performance. Yes, this is the test. It's quite an old test, it's a very good test nonetheless. As you're going to notice over here, the performance is not bad, but it's not as good as it could be due to the video chipset. Toshiba was quite conservative in the chipsets that were used. Unfortunately, this went on to become a problem as technology evolved and they could not keep the pace. With such processors, some manufacturers were choosing Neomagic chipset that had even higher typical performance. 6 megapixels from RAM to screen performance, I think is quite fine. It's a bit lower than you might expect. I think that around 10 megapixels is typical for a laptop of this era. On the other hand, the ability to draw using the screen memory is good, 28 megapixels. It could be slightly higher, but I think that the highest culprit is the performance of transferring data between the video RAM and the main RAM of the system. Alright, and since I promised, let me show you also how it's going to run additional useful games. And I will be showing you first of all Quake, and I will run actually the benchmark for Quake because I think it's highly telling. Right. Yes, over here it's quite dark, so I will have to change the brightness a bit. I think this one looks quite fine, although I will also have to change the screen, change the exposure in order to have a better ability of you seeing the actual game. Okay, I think this one is quite fine. Alright, let me see. Okay. If I remember correctly, yes, this is. I think it will have over 20 frames per second, probably somewhere around 40, which is not going to be the bad. Actual performance in 320 by 200 resolution is going to be entirely perfect. There is no issue about that. The only problem is that running at the full resolution of 640 by 800 by 600 is going to pose some challenges. 48 frames per second, yes, it's a very good performance. Unfortunately, as mentioned, if you're going to run the game at higher resolution, it's going to have lower performance, but it's running perfectly smooth. with such a configuration. So if you wanted to enjoy Quake on a Pentium 1 era system, this one is a very good choice. Alright, let me show you how it runs in the maximum resolution. As you can see, not quite well. I think it runs at less than 15 frames per second, so don't get your hopes up related to or thinking about running the game at full resolution. Probably your best bet is 640 by 480, because this is not going to have such a taxing effect on the system. It's not perfectly smooth, as you can see. It's still better if you run it at 320 by 200. And this is an issue you're going to see with many laptops of that era, particularly due to the video chipset as mentioned. The processor is plenty fast, but unfortunately the video chipset is not. Alright, so yes, I think you quite understood what is the typical expected performance. So 640 by 480 I think is the top performance you might be expecting. Alright, now let me show you running it, running Windows 98. I think that Windows 98 is a very good choice for the system, basically because Pentium processors that are faster than 143 MHz run, yes, no problem. Probably this was due to the fact that we run another protected mode application before. This can happen. It's not something that is entirely annoying. It's not a particular problem with this laptop. I'm pretty sure there is something in the configuration that has to be changed in order to avoid such an issue. Generally, it's better to restart the system when you have run plenty applications. But you're going to see that right now it's not going to have the same problem. As mentioned, if you have more than 32 megabytes of RAM and you're running at least a 143 MHz processor, Windows 98 is quite a good choice. And it's not a problem with having a good performance in it. I just wanted to show you the full joy of running or listening the Microsoft sound. So I want to play it again just for your enjoyment, and I hope you like it. So Windows 98, and I think that there is a directory that is called Media, and then you have the Microsoft sound. I have to say that sound playback is of a very good quality. You have stereo speakers, the sound system is great, and I think that if you're going to plug it into an external sound system, a receiver, some set of good speakers, is going to sound fabulous. For a laptop of this era, I don't think you can go any better than Toshiba laptops. Of course, later some IBM models had also very good sound playback capabilities, but I still think that the Toshiba ones had an edge up until the Pentium 2 era. Later, other manufacturers already started to have quite good sound capabilities, and especially good speakers, good placement, but still Toshiba laptops had very good sound playback. Alright, so let me show you a typical test program I wanted to run. I think that the best one is Test CPU. It's quite an old benchmarking program. It was released in 2000. It can run even on highly modern processors. However, the most important aspect is that it shows extensively some data that is highly important in order to assess the performance of various processors. And I think this is one of the most important aspects of it. As you can see over here, we don't have a Pentium 233 processor. I think we have something that is roughly similar but not the same speed. As you can see, the performance is quite good in general. This is the line that is being created through the performance of the L1 cache, which is actually the cache that runs at the CPU speed. So if the CPU speed is higher, of course the L1 cache speed is higher. The second test, and I think that you already understand what you are seeing over here. It's not a bad processor, it's a very good one actually. And one of the most important aspects is that compared with the first generation Pentium models, it runs very cool. It's actually one of the later technology processors, so this is why it runs so well, even at this quite high speed for Pentium processor. I think there was a 266 model that was also released, but for laptops. For desktop computers, the 233 MHz one was the fastest. Alright, so I think quite a good performance in this respect. I will show to you also another game that I think is quite good to run. You can run your typical assortment of games from Need for Speed to second special edition to Pod. You can see a bit of a slowdown, and this is actually one of the first games that has some issues in performance despite the very good processor speed. And I can tell you certainly that the processor is plenty enough, because a 166 megahertz model actually doesn't have any kind of slowdown. The only slowdown you're going to see over here in terms of a lower frame rate is due to the video chipset. So running such demanding games, of course demanding for the era, is not particularly problematic, but however you're not going to have top performance. So this is what you can typically expect. However, compatibility, as mentioned, is very good, and I think this is one of the most important aspects with a laptop of this era, because you can run quite difficult games such as the Planet of Doom or Pod, which actually doesn't run quite well on most systems. Ignition is another game that is quite taxing on certain configuration of laptops, is particularly with slower video chipsets, and in that case you cannot run it properly at high speed. You are going to have a lower performance, and you have to accept this. Over here we are running only in 640 by 480, but you can see a slight issue with the frame rate. It's not quite smooth running, or as smooth running as you might expect. Something similar to what you have noticed in Need for Speed 2. Because again, the processor is not the issue over here, it's the video chipset that is not drawing fast enough. But I wanted to show to you that clearly there are some limitations despite the very fast processor and advanced technology that you can see in the rest of the configuration. So I think you had quite a good selection of games. You can obviously run Wolfenstein 3D and other old games. There is not any kind of problem in running them. However, I think that the most appropriate games are early Windows ones, and of course a large selection of those games. You can run those games at full speed, at half speed. This is not an issue. However, I still think that the laptop is best suited to run somewhat more modern games. But it's quite flexible, and I think this is a major advantage. If you want to see how good the configuration is, you can notice over here And there are more than 42 megabytes of RAM used. And of course, I could have a large discussion because there is plenty of RAM. If RAM was quite on the short side, then I would probably choose just a 1 megabyte disk cache in order to have more RAM available. But in this configuration, you clearly have everything you could. In theory, you can also run Windows 2000 or a more recent operating system, but I don't know exactly what could be the best scenario for such a situation, because ultimately it's not something that is going to be running particularly fast. The drive I used over here has more than 4 gigabytes capacity. It's just formatted as a 4 gigabyte drive because there was not any sort of reason in order to have higher disk space available. But you can choose to have 32 gigabyte drives with no problem. With a partition, a FAT32 partition that is 32 gigabyte drive. You can even have higher capacity drives, that's not an issue. But for this reason, I think that it's enough. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you like, please subscribe to the channel. There are going to be more videos. I have not been making as many recently, but there are going to be some new ones available. I have many other devices, laptops, and other products I would like to show to you. So if you enjoy seeing these videos, then I'm very glad. So thank you very much for watching.